Hi, I'm Vernon again. Have you ever been tormented by a man's silence? As a man myself, I'll admit, I've gone silent on my own wife more times than I care to admit. In today's video, I'll reveal the hidden truths behind a man's silence. Truths that most men over 60 would never want you to know. Because sometimes that silence isn't distance, it's a quiet test. A way to see how you react, how much you'll tolerate, how easily you'll break. It's not confusion, it's control. And for women who've spent years giving, listening, and staying strong, that silence can feel like betrayal. But it's not a reflection of your worth, it's a revelation of his character. And once you understand what's really behind it, you won't feel powerless again. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share might just change the way you hear silence forever. And if this message speaks to something you've felt deep down, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Someone else out there may need this just as much as you do. So what drives a man into silence to begin with? And what is he truly trying to communicate without saying a word? 1. Silence make men feel safer than speaking. Let's start here. For many men, silence is safety, not comfort, safety. You see, men are often raised to believe that speaking openly about their fears, doubts, or emotional needs is a sign of weakness. So instead of explaining what they feel, they shut down, they retreat, they hold it in. Not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to speak in the language of vulnerability. When a man is silent, he may be wrestling with something that has nothing to do with you. Financial stress, a deep fear of rejection, lingering wounds from the past. Or the silent expectation that he must always be the strong one, even when he's breaking inside. And so he tests, not with cruel intention, but with confusion and fear. He wants to know, will she still respect me if I don't have the answers? Will she chase after me? Will she lose patience? But here's the trap. When we chase silence with noise, we often feed the very distance we're trying to close. The more you demand answers, the more he retreats. Not because you're wrong to ask, but because he's not equipped to answer. Understanding this doesn't mean excusing it, but it gives you the upper hand, the power to respond wisely, not reactively. And sometimes the most powerful response to silence is your own silence. A silence rooted in strength, not surrender. A silence that says, I see you, but I won't lose myself trying to make you speak. As the philosopher Epictetus once said, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. In choosing silence with intention, you're not backing down, you're rising above. You're choosing inner control over outer chaos. That is the kind of strength no noise can shake. Because true connection doesn't come from pulling words out of someone. It comes from creating the safety where words no longer need to be forced. They flow. In those quiet moments, what a man often longs for isn't to be fixed or interrogated. It's to be felt, seen, accepted. He wants to know that his silence won't scare you away, that you can sit with it without panic, that you can offer presence without pressure. that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stay calm, grounded, and unwavering. And once we understand the roots of his silence, a new question emerges. What if behind all that quiet, he's holding back a storm of longing? In the next part, we'll explore the subtle signs that reveal when a man is silently obsessed with you, even if he never says a word. 2. The signs he's silently obsessed with you. He doesn't say it. He might not even show it in grand gestures. But when a man is silently obsessed with you, it's in the details. The small, almost invisible ways he orbits around your world without asking for credit. He remembers things you've long forgotten he told him. The kind of tea you like. The way you fidget with your necklace when you're deep in thought. The way your voice softens when you speak about someone you love. These aren't coincidences. They're markers, proof that he's paying attention, quietly, constantly. He may not reach out with words, but he shows up, in little ways. Fixing something without you asking. Checking in under the guise of something casual. Standing a little closer than he needs to. Looking at you longer than he should. Obsession doesn't always look like pursuit. It often looks like quiet presence, like proximity that asks nothing but offers everything. And when you pull away, he notices. He doesn't say it, but you'll feel it in the subtle shift of his energy. A flicker of discomfort, a change in rhythm, a sudden need to reappear in your orbit just to make sure you haven't drifted too far. It's easy to miss these signs when you expect obsession to be loud. But the loudest feelings in a man's heart are often the ones he doesn't yet know how to express. I remember back when I was courting my wife, before the kids, before the house, I wouldn't say much. But I always made sure to drive the long way just to see her home lit up. I never said, "I miss you," but I'd find excuses to drop off something she mentioned once in passing. That was my way of staying close without asking for permission. And maybe you've seen that too, small moments that didn't feel loud but lingered in your heart. If any of this reminds you of your own story, I'd love to hear it. Drop a comment below and share what quiet love has looked like in your life. That's why you must listen, not with your ears, but with your intuition. Because a man's obsession, when unspoken, lives in the way he chooses to stay close, even if his mouth stays closed. So what do you do when that quiet presence suddenly vanishes? When he pulls away, not in anger, but in that familiar, unsettling silence? That's what we'll explore next. How to navigate that space with grace and respond without losing yourself in the process. 3. The still power of presence. How to respond when he grows distant. When he pulls away, the instinct is to chase, to ask questions, to fill the silence with something, anything that feels like connection. But chasing silence rarely brings us peace, and it almost never brings clarity. Here's what I've learned, not just as a man, but as a husband who has both pulled away and been gently brought back. The first step is this: don't panic. Emotional withdrawal isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's confusion. Sometimes it's shame. Sometimes it's his way of processing what he doesn't yet understand about himself. But when you meet that silence with stillness, with calm,
You offer something rare, a sense of emotional safety. Instead of demanding words, offer space. Instead of pleading, observe. How long does he stay distant? Does he come back differently? What does his silence teach you about where he's at and where you stand in his heart? This is not about playing games. It's about reclaiming your emotional footing, because you cannot walk on eggshells in hopes he'll come closer. You can only stand tall in your own truth and invite him to meet you there. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is nothing at all, not out of spite, but out of quiet confidence, out of respect for your own worth. And if he returns, let your energy speak before your words. Don't rush to explain. Let him see the strength you carried in his absence. As Carl Jung once said, what you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. The more we fight for control, the more we become entangled in fear. But when we release that grip, when we choose grounded stillness over anxious pursuit, we create space for truth to return on its own. A man often comes back not to words, but to presence. And sometimes your calm becomes the mirror he didn't know he needed to face himself and remember what's worth returning to. In those moments of distance, what a man truly needs from the woman beside him is not persuasion, but patience. Not pressure, but presence. To know she can hold space for his silence without demanding it be filled. That's where trust begins to grow. And perhaps the most surprising part of all is that silence doesn't always have to be a wall. Sometimes, when both hearts are ready, silence becomes a bridge. In the next part, we'll explore how it can evolve into a shared language, one that heals, connects, and speaks even when no words are said.
4. When silence becomes a form of power and not always the kind you think. There's a side to silence that doesn't come from love or safety or even emotional confusion. It comes from control, from power, from the deeply ingrained belief that by withholding words, a man can hold the upper hand. And the truth is, many men over 60 have mastered this kind of silence, not as a way to protect intimacy, but to preserve dominance. This isn't always intentional. Sometimes it's learned, passed down from fathers who never spoke about their pain, from a culture that taught boys to equate stoicism with strength. But when silence becomes a way to manipulate, to punish, or to avoid responsibility, it stops being a tool for peace and starts becoming a weapon. You'll know this kind of silence because it feels like walking through a room full of broken glass barefoot. You measure every word, you shrink a little, you second-guess yourself. And even though he says nothing, the message is loud and clear. Stay small. Don't challenge me. Read my mind. If any of this feels familiar, save this video. You may want to come back to it when the silence gets too loud. This is the silence that erodes trust. The kind that leaves you emotionally starving even while you're still physically together. And it's important, no, vital, that you learn to name it. Because once you recognize it, you can choose something different. You can step back from the need to decode and instead stand firmly in your truth. That real love doesn't use silence to gain control. It uses it to create safety.
But awareness alone isn't enough, because recognizing this kind of silence is only the first step. What matters next is how you respond. In the next part, we'll explore how to draw firm, compassionate boundaries without losing your voice or yourself. 5. His silence becomes a mirror. What his distance reveals about you. Years ago, during a quiet season in my marriage, I found myself feeling frustrated with my wife's silence until I realized I was the one who had gone quiet first, not out of anger, but out of fatigue, distraction, self-absorption. And it struck me, sometimes a man's silence is simply reflecting back the emotional gap that already exists between two people. This kind of silence isn't a game or a punishment. It's a mirror, a subtle invitation to pause and look inward. Because while it's easy to fixate on what he's not saying, the deeper wisdom comes from asking, what is this silence revealing about me? About my patterns, my reactions, my needs? Maybe his silence is awakening echoes of your childhood, when love felt uncertain or had to be earned. Maybe it's revealing just how deeply you equate being needed with being loved. Or perhaps it's showing you just how quickly you abandon your own needs just to keep the peace. Sometimes his silence doesn't point to what's wrong with him. It gently uncovers what's still healing in you. This isn't about blaming yourself. It's about reclaiming your power. Because once you begin to see silence not just as a wall, but as a signal, you can use it to grow instead of shrink. Instead of asking, why won't he talk to me? Ask, what is this silence asking me to notice in myself? The silence you sit with today may be the beginning of a deeper self-trust tomorrow. And from that place, you can decide more clearly, do I stay? Do I speak? Do I step back? Because sometimes the breakthrough doesn't come when he finally talks. It comes when you finally listen to yourself. Finally, let silence lead you to strength. So what does his silence really mean? It can be a test, a form of control, a cry for help, or even an echo of his own fear. But in all its forms, it invites one thing from you: awareness. Awareness that allows you to choose presence over panic, boundaries over confusion, self-respect over self-abandonment. You see, silence isn't just something you survive, it's something you learn from. It sharpens your emotional intelligence. It invites you to trust your intuition. And most of all, it challenges you to speak more gently, but more truthfully to yourself. Because when you stop fearing his silence, you begin hearing your own voice more clearly. And that's the kind of strength that doesn't depend on anyone else's words. As Seneca once wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." True freedom comes when you are no longer waiting for someone else's words to validate your worth. You become rooted in your own voice, your own stillness, your own truth. So take this message with you. Reflect on it. Share it with a friend who might need it. And if it spoke to something in your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, because you never know who else is sitting in silence, waiting to be seen. Until next time, take care of your voice and never be afraid to let the quiet teach you something true. And I'm Vernon, and thanks for watching my video.